everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say carpe diem. It's all about going after the things you want in life. And something I wanted to do this year was to rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time actually talk about it with other people. And we've been up leveling that because now I'm getting a chance to talk with people who actually worked on this show. So I'm really looking forward to that. But before I introduce my guest for today, just a quick housekeeping item. If you're brand new to the show, the episode recaps are spoiler free up until the episode that you're on. So those are safe for you. These interviews could be spoiler filled. We could mention anything that happened in any season or episode of the show. So just be aware of that up front. But having said all that, I'm very excited to welcome my guest for today, who is Nick Pupo, who played Carl, one of the mutiny coders from seasons 2 and 3 of Halt and Catch Fire. Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is so cool. It's a
Yes.
show that's very close to my heart. So it's cool to revisit it.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And I guess, well, let's start at the beginning with that. How did you get on the show to begin with? What was that process?
Um, so it was my first job as an actor. At the time I was living in Florida where I'm from, and I was doing stand-up comedy. I've been doing stand-up comedy for a long time, and at that point, probably about 5 years, I had taken some acting classes. I had an agent. I had mostly been doing some auditions for, small commercials, regional commercials, and I was working at a restaurant as a server, mostly brunch shifts, and I got this audition. It was a self-tape, and at the time I didn't know what a self-tape was. For any listeners who might not know, it's just you tape yourself at home. Typically, you have a friend reading the other person's lines in the script. You're given these sides, and you tape yourself doing this scene or a few scenes. You send it to casting, and then they go from there. Typically, you'll get a callback that's in person, and then so when I got this audition, I had been getting so many auditions for these commercials, and I kind of been doing it for a couple of years, and I wasn't really thrilled about it. My agent was sending me stuff that I just didn't care to do. So when I saw this, I had never heard of the show, and I kind of brushed it off. And I went about my life, and my agent called me and said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on or why you haven't, have you not read this email? This is an AMC show. It's kind of like they're calling it the Mad Men with computers in the 80s. And this is a cool opportunity." And so I was like, well, what is a self-tape? And they explained to me what a self-tape was. And then I was like, all right. So I got with a friend, taped the audition, sent it off. And then I got a callback, and it was just weird. I'd never had a callback before. It was in Atlanta. So I didn't have a way of getting there. And I asked my dad if he would drive me up there. I was 25, 24. And so my dad drove me up to Atlanta. We got a hotel, and I did the callback with a bunch of other coders. These other guys, just a ton of actors in this casting office that were, they were casting an entire group of coders together. And I'm sure that there are other people who have talked about this that you've interviewed, but the process was crazy. It was very, very, the adrenaline was pumping, the pressure was very high, and they started calling us in to do these scenes with the other groups of people, and then they would basically send us out, and then they would send some people home, and then they didn't choose me to send me home, and then they kept bringing me in to read with other people, and that kept happening, and I wasn't getting sent home, and I was called in more and more, and I was like, well, this is a good sign, I think, right? But when you're acting, when you're auditioning, you feel like, as a young actor, you're like, there's no way that this could ever happen. But as the day went on, and as I was not being sent home, I was like, man, this is kind of wild that I'm not being sent home. And then I auditioned with all the people that they kind of narrowed in on, and we did the scene and we were killing in the room. Everybody was laughing. And then at the end, they were like, they put us back in the hallway and they were like, so just, we're gonna contact your agents. We're gonna, show the producers like some stuff and we'll call you. And so it was kind of like this thing of like, well, still, like, I don't really believe that this is a possibility. And so a whole group of us went to a diner and just kind of got to know each other. And within a few hours, they called me and said that I had booked the part, and this whole group that I auditioned with had booked the part as well.
Wow, what an
Yeah,
incredible process. And I was going to say, there's some sort of chemistry test. It sounds like there was a big group chemistry test.
yeah,
It
yeah.
really
It was
shows in
it
the show
was
as well.
yeah, it was, and it was really amazing because all of us had, I think maybe a few of us had some smaller jobs, but for all of us, it was our first real gig, and we were all just beyond thrilled, and from that point, it was just like, a brand new friendship with all these people.
At what point in that process did you go back and watch the show at some point in that process? And if so, when?
Yeah, for sure. Before I went for the callback, or maybe even before I watched or I did the audition, I watched the whole first season that was already out. And yeah, the whole point of them bringing us in was that the first season is pretty jokeless. It doesn't have a lot of comedic relief, and so I think they were like, we want to bring in like some young people and kind of get a little bit more levity to the whole show, and add some silliness and fun. So yeah, I was aware of the show and what the tone was, and kind of understood what they were trying to go for.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
once you get this role, what do you do to prep for the role of Carl?
Um, well, I didn't really know how to prep, I think. I at the time I don't think I just saw this, they give us the script and I read the script and I just was like, all right, I'm just gonna do the lines the way that I auditioned, and just do it to the best of my instincts, because luckily I had some experience with like improv comedy, and I had been doing stand up for 5 years, so I was like, I know how to hit certain comedic beats. I've been kind of honing those skills for a while. But I didn't have like, I didn't understand how to really build a character and make him feel really three-dimensional, and there wasn't a lot of, with our characters, there wasn't a lot of stuff like that. There wasn't like, we didn't have backstories, we didn't have, there weren't lines that kind of like, you know, it made us like kind of what you could kind of feed off of. It was just very joke here, kind of like, you know, filler stuff, so we kind of had to figure out like, oh, how would I make this guy more real? And I learned
Yeah.
that as I went along.
You also are very much sort of a fixer on the team. And so we're going to see a lot of important moments of programming where it has to look somewhat convincing. Was that just like something that you were trying to figure out on the day, or was there some sort of prep you were able to do for that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember trying to like, I mean, I was just looking for anything that I could, from other actors, of like, how would I build this up? I started to really study people. I started to listen to a lot of interviews and podcasts of actors that I admired. And I remember I asked Mackenzie Davis, one day when we were on set, I was just kind of like, hey, what did you do? Like when you got this role, like, did you learn how to code? And she was like, a little bit. She was like, it's coding is a difficult process. It's a whole other skill set. So she was like, I learned a little bit, but I kind of took kind of what I felt I needed from that, and applied it, but I didn't like really delve too deep into that. So I started to kind of learn how to code a little bit. I started taking some classes, but a lot of like the programming stuff is just kind of like, it's kind of like if you're sitting at a computer and you have to like type out some stuff, you have to just understand what is happening. You talk to the director, or the writers or whatever about like, if I was a coder, like what would this mean, you know? And what am I really trying to accomplish? And then you kind of fill it in like some other story in your head of like that creates a sense of urgency. You know, like if I were trying to stop this thing, like what can I pretend that I'm doing that's going to make me, you know, feel really afraid or really like urgent, you know, about this whole situation.
Mm. So it's funny, you go back and you watch season one, but one of the great things about season two is that it sort of reinvents the tone of the show. And then it lays the foundation for the show to reinvent itself in season three and in season four. So it sounds like you did know that they were trying to do something different in season two. But when you
Mhm.
get on set to start filming, how much of that was set in stone versus how much of it was sort of you were all feeling it out as it went?
Well, I think that I don't know if you know this about. I mean, I know you've talked to a lot of people so far, and some of the great directors that we worked with. But you know, the Chris's were Chris Rogers and Chris Cantwell. It was their first thing, also. Like they had never been showrunners before, and so that's what I think was really interesting about this show. And part of what made it really special was everybody, including the people at the top, were really trying to figure out what the show was. Um, I remember talking to people when I got on set, and it was like everybody was surprised that they had gotten the second season because it was I think they almost hadn't, and we were in this age of television where we had just had Breaking Bad on AMC, we just had Mad Men on AMC, and you know the network was like in this place where they really were believing, they were taking chances on shows, and they saw a lot of potential in this show, so they gave it another shot. So it felt like a very collaborative process where we were like figuring out our characters as the showrunners and writers were also trying to kind of figure out what the show was as well. So the process for me really was just it was just doing what I was told and listening to the directors and reading the scripts and just reading them over again, looking at the lines, like just honing them and getting them in my body, you know. But yeah, I don't think there was like a really definitive way of developing, you know, what I thought the tone was or anything, because I think it was very new for the series.
Mm, absolutely. So let's get into talking about some of the episodes and scenes that you're in. And I what I think is so interesting about your character is that while you were one of a big group of coders, sometimes you're in scenes where it feels like, yeah, we're part of a group. And sometimes I feel like I get a really distinct understanding of who Carl is. So it'll be fun to sort of look at that as we go through and see what are those moments where you were able to set yourself apart and differentiate this character. But that first episode that you were in, that most of you were in, was 201 SETI. You start with that long oneer right off at the
Mm-hmm.
top, right off the top. And you're doing a couple specific things in that where you're breaking up a fight between Lev and Yo-Yo. You're solving a crisis that's happening, and it feels like a good setup for where your character is going to go. But what was it like shooting that very first episode?
Well, it was very thrilling and surreal. The idea of one being on a TV show after the week before, serving, brunch to drunk, customers. So that was like a very strange feeling, and trying to just manage that was a lot of what I was thinking about. That kind of stress. But I did know just based off of the script that whoever Carl was, what bit he was a bit arrogant, um, and there was a sense of some kind of leadership there, where whether he kind of gave that title to himself or kind of just took on the role because it was necessary. But one of the first lines is about how he's playing online chess with somebody and they made a ridiculous move. This guy opened with F3, you know, like is something like, does he even know how to play chess? Like this guy is just like, he's intelligent. He's very good at chess. He's a really good coder. He kind of seems like, he's maybe a bit above some of these people, as opposed to somebody like Bodhi, who Bodhi's kind of like fart joke, like whatever. This job is like just something that I needed, and but you also get a sense like they're coders that work for this company. They were hired for a reason. Everybody knows what they're doing. I think Wonder Boy, he was a young kid who was like 17, 18 in the show, but he, took his job very seriously. So I think that my character took the job very seriously, was a bit arrogant, maybe kind of an asshole. But yeah, from the first episode, I think that's kind of how I understood my character. And I didn't know where it was going, and I don't think anybody did.
Yeah. Well, but
So
we add a new layer to that in the next episode in New Coke 202. Boz comes out of jail and sort of straight into the mutiny house. Some people knew him, some people didn't. The legend of Boz was probably pretty strong in that house. And he's being hazed, and a lot of the guys are teasing him. But one of the things that they do to haze him, if you can call this hazing, was, they got their hands on a letter that he had written to the last letter that he had written from jail to
yeah,
Cameron. And Lev finds a way to like steam it and open it and starts reading it, this very personal letter. And when it starts to get really personal, Carl in the room is like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And there are a couple people who have that voice. So we start to add this layer of Carl where like maybe there's a bit more maturity there than some of
yeah.
his other colleagues. You mentioned that there wasn't backstory that was written for you, but once you start getting to this point, did you make any decisions about where all of this came from for him? What kind of backstory did you invent for yourself?
Well, I quickly, and this was easy for me because Boz, played by Toby Huss, um, you know, Toby himself was somebody that I adored. And when I got on the set, I had watched Toby in a show called Pete and Pete in the 90s, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, and he played this guy named Artie, the strongest man in the world. And when I found out that he was on the show, I was really excited. And I met him, and I remember my acting teacher was like, don't, like, if you meet people that you respect, that you like, that are stars or whatever, that you don't have to talk about the things that they were in. You don't have to fan out and all that stuff. And I remember when I first met Toby, I had that in my mind, but I immediately was like, hey man, I was like a huge fan of Pete and Pete. Like it just came out. And he was like very gracious, and he was like very kind. And I immediately, Toby has a thing about him, and you see it in the show. He's just such a likable guy. He's so charismatic. He's got a glint in his eye, a twinkle that you just right away you just like him. And so when they had that moment of reading the letter, August, Lev reading the letter and kind of making fun of it and whatever, I got defensive, and it was easy for me to get defensive because I saw Toby played Boz in such a real way, and I mean, he's so impactful, dude. I love that guy so much, and his character I just immediately loved. So when that was happening, the real me was like, hey man, like this isn't cool. Like this is like a real relationship that this guy had. It was kind of funny. I understand like that we're playing jokes, but like this is the real moment for this guy, and I don't agree with it. And I started to kind of feel like, well, I don't know how I feel about Lev. I kind of don't like that he's doing this, and that all became very real for me.
Mm.
So that was easy to find that. So I think, yeah, I think to answer your question, there throughout the series, I kept that. I kept that kind of love for Boz. Like I really deeply loved him throughout the entire show.
Nice. Um, we talked a little bit about Carl's leadership. And I think initially on that team, it's meant to be that everybody's at the same level. But Carl maybe feels like he's a leader, but at some point it starts getting recognized more in the show itself. And I'm wondering when you saw that transition happened. I mean, in 203, the way in, we're going to see Gordon's program Sonaris. It's actually a virus. Oops. And it just gets unleashed on Mutiny and kind of wipes out everything they've been working on. And it's a really big crisis on the team. And Carl really steps up and takes on a lot of that troubleshooting. He's working through the night, trying to make things better. Not everybody stays to do that. So at what point in this show did you start to feel like the show was recognizing that Carl was a leader?
Well, that comes from that comes from when you read the script and you see that the writers have written more things for you. When I, it would kind of go like every week or whatever you get to set, or they'd email you, you'd read the episode and you'd see on the page, oh, they have me doing more stuff here. And you start to see how the writers think of you and your character and how they're shaping it. And that was like I just started to catch on. I started to see like, all right, so my guy is compassionate. He cares about the company. The other coders fuck around a little bit more. Sorry, excuse my language. You can bleep that out if you want. But the other coders kind of are more jokey and kind of mess around and don't take it as seriously. But Carl is he cares about this company, and he is kind of devastated when he sees what Sonaris has done to it. And yeah, it's interesting. I haven't thought about this stuff in a while. I honestly, I've never thought about my character in this way. So it's the journey for me.
Well, hey, we do deep dives here.
Yeah.
I've given a lot of thought to your character, so I'm really excited to talk with you about him. I mean, okay,
cool.
if we go to the next episode, Play with Friends is kind of has some iconic moments in it. But one of the things that happens here is that obviously Mutiny is in a tough spot after Sonaris hurt the business as much as it did, and everybody's really trying to figure out how to get back on their feet. They can't make payroll initially. And there's a meeting early on where Cameron and Donna are talking to everybody about the state of the company and saying like, well, we're not going to be able to pay you for a minute here. Would you accept shares of the company? And it's a decision point for people on the team. But Carl is one of the guys who's very ready to stay, even to get paid in shares. So why do you think he stays at that point?
I think he believes in Cameron 100%. I think that he is. I remember playing that scene, and I mean, he doesn't believe in just Cameron. He believes in Donna as well, and he sees them as a dynamic duo. He has complete faith that right away. I mean, I think that it gets to him, and he's are you in? And he says he's in. He's like, of course I'm in. And I remember playing that in a very kind of with a lot of compassion. I saw Donna, and it was easy to watch because that was the thing I realized in the show was watching Mackenzie and Carrie act, play these characters in this really real way. I made a decision with Carl of like, not just my decision, but also the writers, but like playing up that love and just answering that, responding in the way that was like, absolutely, of course I'm in. Like you guys have my complete faith and loyalty. So yeah, that was an episode where I started to feel like some real love for those characters.
Yeah. And some other really cool things happen in this episode that it's sort of easy to place this episode when you think about these particular scenes. So we got posing for the mutiny photo, and we get the Nerf dart battle through the house. What do you remember about this episode and working on scenes like that?
That was a very fun scene. Um, I don't really remember what was happening in the episode but I do remember Mackenzie having that moment with me where she said something to me right before I was like running into the other room to start continuing the Nerf war. Um, but I mean, that was just a very, very fun bonding moment for everybody, you know? And yeah, I mean, I think I started to see Carl still as like this person that, especially between me and Mackenzie, that like whatever was happening off screen, like they just had an unspoken kind of admiration, you know? There was just kind of whatever that was like she trusted me. I was there for her. You know, I had her back no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something I picked up on it later, but it sounds like it was already brewing for you behind the scenes. That exchange that you had, she wants to do something she's like, did you do that thing to wipe out community? Because she doesn't really want community to be a thing at the start. And you're like, no, but I probably could. I'm not that drunk. And she's like, no, keep it, keep it. You're like, great, because I actually am pretty drunk. And
Right,
then
right. Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
like go and continue playing the game. But she it's sort of like she can, like, Carl is sort of the vault of that information that he was supposed to do this task and now he's not supposed to do it. And I guess she feels like she can trust him enough to have him not
Yeah.
leak that everywhere. So
Yeah, yeah, totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite Carl moments, just in terms of, like, I feel like Carl's every person that I went to college with. There's this exchange between Carl and Boz where Boz is trying to sort of clean up the office and make it more professional. And on that particular day, Carl decides to wear a pajama top um,
Right.
to work. And there's this whole debate about, is it a pajama top? What makes something a pajama top? Like, if you wear
Uh-huh.
something to bed once, is it always a pajama top? And like this
Right, right.
whole very specific thought process around, like,
Right,
just
right.
being able to wear the pajama top to work anyway. um
Yes.
you know what did you like about playing him once you started getting to this point in this series where they were obviously writing more and more for you?
Yeah.
What freedom did that give you on set?
Well, they started writing Carl in a more kind of like snarky manner. They started giving me those kinds of jokes, where he really is analytical and he's a nerd, he's kind of the cool nerd. He's a little bit more hip and all that, but at heart he's a coder, and he knows a lot about technology. He knows a lot about like hardware, software. He eventually you find that he's a bit of a conspiracy nut. Um, but he breaks things down into their smallest components. When he talks to Boz about the pajama top, he's like, "Well, when you think about it, what is a pajama top? We never really have talked about that. Nothing's written. There are no rules. Um, so I started to really like that about him. I started to really have fun with this idea that this guy, he not only is he really analytical and kind of a conspiracy theorist, but he's very confident and shameless in showing that part of himself. And if somebody objects, he's like, "Well, let me kind of explain this for you." You know, and I
Yeah.
like that. It was a lot of fun.
For you personally, when you were on that set, particularly in season two, it feels like that, the house is small enough, it's cramped quarters enough that we can really make out a lot of the set decoration and a lot of the props that they put in place, and a lot of that sort of 80s pop cultural reference that was plastered throughout the house. I'm sure there was a lot of that as well in season three. But the space was so much bigger that we don't necessarily focus in on it as much. But when you looked
Mhm.
around that set, what were some of the things that stuck out for you that you were like, ah, this is a really cool item that they put in this place?
Um, oh man, what were some of the things? I remember they had like a lot of old movie posters. there was a mannequin, I think that was like the big thing. I think that was kind of the main prop that was like I just I just did I just did this movie where the crew had a trash can that was painted like R2D2, and every set that we went to, no matter where we were, there was that R2D2 trash can, and it was always just there, and you never really understood why it was there. And even on different days, it would show up in a different location. So it was kind of this inside joke that the crew had of like, this thing is always here, and we're going to put it in places that it's almost like this Easter egg thing. And I think that the mannequin, if I remember correctly, was kind of that for us, where it was like it's always going to have like on some different clothes, or it's going to be in a different part of the house. And so I feel like that's probably the most memorable thing. Aside from that, there were tons of little pieces of little fun like Easter eggs, or little fun like little toys that were around, but I think the mannequin is probably the thing that sticks out the most in my memory.
Yeah, I always wish that I could look, because there was sort of like a fireplace mantle area where there was this whole stack of videotapes, but you couldn't
Hmm.
really make out what they were. And I always wish I could have
Yeah.
like known what those videotapes were for
Yeah, I
them.
wish I wish I could have remembered. I'm if you I remember I mentioned my friend Justin Randall Brook to you. He played a coder on the show. He had like one line at the end of season one, then he had a couple more in the end of season two, and then more in season three. But he was somebody who spent so much time on that set, just kind of like living in that reality that he was creating for himself, because they weren't giving him a lot at first, so I think that he might remember more things like that. But yeah, there were like tons of the set dressers were just great. I mean, they really made it feel real. And that's part of what made the show so cool, was that whole house was built in a studio, but it was like an entire house with a bathroom and bedrooms and living room and all that stuff. And it made it easy for us to kind of, find a reality there.
That set had a bathroom on it. I'm
It
trying
had
to
a
remember if that
bathroom.
ever played in a scene.
Maybe it did have a bathroom. I feel like it did, but I don't know if it was ever. Maybe it didn't have a bathroom.
There, I was
I
just
can't
watching an
remember.
episode where, I mean, obviously this will sort of give away how far ahead I am in the interviews, but I was just watching an episode where Cam leaves a conversation with Tom to ostensibly go to take a shower, but I don't remember ever having seen that or any other bathroom in the house. But it sounds like the
Right.
space felt like it had all the
Yeah.
right spaces to be livable.
I think if I have an image of my in my head of a bathroom, then it was probably a door. It was probably, if they didn't have a bathroom set, it was probably a door that led to what was thought of as the bathroom. But yeah, no. Now that you mention it, I don't know if we actually had an official set bathroom.
Oh my gosh. So an episode that felt a little different than the other ones, even within the context of season two, was 206, 10 Broad 36. It becomes a heist episode like halfway through, because the team is trying to trick Joe into thinking that they've made some pretty significant changes to their
Mm.
platform in order to get a better rate to use his network. And so there's like a bunch of scenes where you're all trying to figure out how you're going to trick him. And it's very technical, but it's all very like, oh, we can do this and that'll fool him. Well, can we do this and that'll
Yeah,
fool him? And then
that's
at the
right.
end of the
Yeah.
episode, you actually have him in the room. And it's this very tense thing of trying to get him to fall for your tricks. And
Right, right.
and he ultimately doesn't. But it seems like it's working for a good long time. This episode feels so different to me, and I'm wondering what you remember about filming that one.
Uh, I mean, yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I haven't thought about that in a long time, but yeah, I remember it being a lot of fun, conspiring with each other to try and trick this guy who really became a much more antagonistic character in the second season. Um, but no, it's funny because the thing I remember most about that was my relationship with Mark O'Brien and how that started to build, because uh, he played Tom Rendon, was that his name?
Yep.
Um, and it was a love interest for Mackenzie's character, and that was when my relationship started to really meld into something really special with Mark, because I found out that he was one of the silliest guys that I had ever worked with in any context. So in between takes where we were messing with this hardware, and I had these goggles on, and said that thing about cat people or whatever, and seeing half a boob or whatever. Um, in between those takes that we were doing, Mark and I were just making these like crazy absurd jokes, and just it was just me and him that were it was like taking to the next level these absurd scenarios of like what could happen in this scene, but like we were just dying laughing the whole time, and then we would go back into another take and then do this like thing where we were like, well, if we move this over here, and then he did. So it's just kind of like that's the thing that I remember most about that episode, oddly enough. But I don't know. I don't recall too much about that, other than like having just like some really fun moments. Having Joe come to the house, and having us all kind of like a lot of these scenes were just really special bonding moments with all of us, and it wasn't just like bonding with us as actors, but as the characters, and each of these things where we all had to work together as a team started to make us all feel like, oh wow, we really are like a team. And so I think that's really that the jokes with Mark, and and then just the kind of bonding experience is what sticks out the most there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Something that you mentioned that was starting to develop earlier, I really noticed in 207 and working for the clampdown, that relationship between Cam and Carl became very clear to me at that point, and maybe should have become clear to me earlier. But basically, in this episode, Joe tenders an offer to buy Mutiny on behalf of
Mm-hmm.
West Group. And Cam becomes like an orator. She gets on a table and she just gets everybody to shout him out of the house. And it feels like this big victory. But then Carl is sort of the first person to start assembling the shredded pieces of the offer letter to try to figure out what
That's
was the
right.
offer actually. And he
Yeah.
puts it together, and everybody starts figuring out what this thing really entailed. And it gets to a point where there's enough unrest where there's going to be a vote on whether people want to sell the company or not. And despite the fact that Carl was the first one to put the pieces together of the paper, at the point when Cam calls his name in the vote, it's like, Carl, what do you want? And she's expecting him to say not sell. And he chooses at first, he's like, can I abstain? She's like, you can't. And then
Mm-hmm.
he eventually sort of under duress says, don't sell it, because he knows, I think that's what Cam wants. What relationship would you say Carl and Cam have at this point? You've hinted at it before, you've said it before in earlier episodes, but for me, it was such a strong feeling in this episode.
Yeah. 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 That was a really fun moment. And I was really flattered. I remember I was very flattered by the writers that they were giving me kind of like an arc in the episode, because I was like, wow, this is like the first time that the story really focuses on me. And so I was really, really thrilled about that. And yeah, that moment was again kind of playing back to that the idea of them giving us shares of the company in place of actual money. Sorry, my cat is crawling all over my desk. But
Cameo.
yeah, so when that moment happened, yeah, I think there was that kind of, it was easy to feel um that that internal battle that Carl was having with himself, of like, I put this whole proposal back together, and I see like the benefit that we could all get from it. I think I looked at Bodhi, who was like, hey, screw this. Let's like, we got to take this deal. and I understood that side of it. But then again, it was like, I I have so much love for Cam that I understand why she would not want to sell, because this is technically selling out. If we do sell the company, I mean, it's quite literally selling out. If we sell the company, yes, we will benefit financially, but the integrity that we have for this company would dissipate. So it was kind of this internal thing that he was having with himself. And I remember having to play with that in the moment of like, okay, this is a real thing. Like, you have to be deep in thought about this. Do you want to take the money, or do you want to be here for your friend? And that was a great, very fulfilling moment for me. And also just a moment where I was like, I get to watch, you know, Mackenzie Davis act her butt off here. And it was so easy for me to react and feel all those things because she was fantastic. So watching her, I just felt all those things. And so, I think when you're working with great actors, it's really easy for you to give that same thing back. So yeah, that was a really, really cool moment.
Yeah. Another episode that feels very distinctive in terms of like you can kind of know exactly where you are in the season when you mention a couple of moments from this episode is 208 from Limbo. First of all, there's a party at the Mutiny House. Looks like all day, all night. My understanding is that was shot over a couple of days. What
Yeah.
do you remember about shooting that party scene, or the many scenes that we get?
Yeah, I remember the party scene was a lot of fun. I remember they gave me a little monologue going back to the whole kind of, expanding on that conspiracy nut, character trait of Carl, where, he's making his case for why the moon landing was faked. And, um, you know, I think Way was mentioning the technologies that they can use in movies now of obviously it's fake, like they planned it all. I remember that being a lot of fun. Having that scene was really, really exciting. And the whole scene, when you're shooting a party scene in a show or a movie, it starts to feel like a party. When you're pretending that it's a party, it's, even when the camera's cut, you're kind of like, this is a party because I'm meeting all these new people. And maybe our beers are fake beers and the food is really not something you want to eat very much of, but it was just a blast. It was very fun. And then I think right later on in the night, something happens. I don't remember exactly what, but something happens with Mutiny where I'm sitting at a desk
That's another
and
iconic
Donna.
moment. That's
Yeah.
when Westnet takes over Mutiny. Just like the
Yeah.
interface is now switched over to Westnet, but it looks like what
Right.
Mutiny used to look like. And Carl is the first person to spot it.
Yeah.
And that episode is going to escalate pretty quickly at the end, where Joe comes to the Mutiny House to try to tell Cameron, like, I didn't have anything to do with this, which you
That's
can
right.
argue whether or not he actually did. I mean, he didn't,
Right. Right.
but
Yeah.
he started this whole process. But everybody sort of stands in unison, and it's really quite beautiful to see the team sort of just not even entertain him.
That's right.
It sounds like that's a memory that sticks out for you. What do you remember about those events at the end of the episode?
Well, that episode was really fun for me, because again, I was a brand new actor. And so I kept getting to experience things for the first time. I got to keep experiencing uh, big emotional moments that I was like, I've never done anything like this in my life. So, um, that was a moment where I was like, oh, I get to like really act here. Like I get to really show like some fear and just feel genuinely scared for what's happened to this thing that we've all built together. And that's, again, that's something that was really special about that show, was like the bonding that we all made with each other offset or on set, but behind the cameras when we weren't actually rolling was transferable, into the show. It really was, there was a lot of real feelings and emotions that existed there. So when this thing fell down, when Mutiny was taken over, and then suddenly we're all panicking and trying to do what we can to put the pieces back together. It was yeah, it was emotional, and and I remember being really proud of that scene, because it just turned out really well. I think everybody did such a killer job.
No, I agree. When we look at season three, right away from 301, the show is reinventing itself again. You're in a new city. Mutiny is in a much more spacious location. It all
Yeah.
feels very different as a viewer. How did the tone shift on set, and what were you trying to achieve with it?
Well, that was cool. I mean, I remember it was very, very exciting that they, at the end of the second season, they had written on, you know, I was on the plane to go to California, and I think we all were like reading the script and we are like, oh, we're all going to California, and yeah, in reality, we're all shooting in Atlanta. But we were like, hey man, like this is great. They like us. The show likes us. We get to be in the next season. So coming on to the third season was like really, really, really fun and really cool because we had success. We had built something that was new. So the first episode of season three was so different from the first episode of season two because at this point, we didn't feel like we were really struggling as a company. We had kind of gotten to the next level. We had this big warehouse and we had made it into our own, version of the Mutiny House. And we all had a bit more confidence and felt like reassured that like we had achieved something really, really cool here. And that was great. And then they have my character. I think it was the first episode of me having another conspiracy rant about Reagan and all that stuff. And so yeah, that was really, really cool. The third season was very exciting.
Yeah. Another really distinctive moment in the show comes in 304 Rules of Honorable Play. We're going to get a whole laser tag sequence. Nothing
Mm.
in the show looks quite like that sequence,
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. I mean, it's set in a laser tag environment. So do you remember much about shooting that, and what was that like for you?
Well, that's an interesting story because it was going to be a really, really fun scene for everybody, kind of reminiscent of the Nerf gun scene in season two. Uh, and not to dwell on this too much because it's a bit of a sad story, but I in the middle of shooting that scene at the laser tag thing, I got a call from one of my very close friends who told me that a mutual friend of ours had passed away. And it was really devastating. And so in the middle of shooting, I had to take a break and I told production, like, I just found this news that I lost a friend. And, they offered, like, they were like, we can move this shoot, or we can write you out of this scene or whatever. And I just I took a while. I sat with one of the producers, who I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. I think his name was John, and he was kind of a legendary producer who
Any
worked on
chance it was
Battlestar
Jeff?
Galactica. Jeff, yes, it
Yeah.
was Jeff. And Jeff was so sweet and sat with me for maybe about a half an hour and just kind of talked about grief and loss and you know just was really truly quite literally a shoulder to cry on. And he was like, do you want to continue on and do you want to do this? And I said, yeah, I can get through it. Um so yeah, we shot that scene and it was a lot of fun, but it was a weird thing where when they yell action, it's like you're not grieving, you're in a laser tag place and you're having the time of your life. And so that's always the thing that sticks out the most about that day. It was pretty crazy.
Wow, what an interesting duality that you had to have on, to shoot that.
Yeah, totally. It was strange.
Possibly an energy that's closer to that when we get towards the end of the season 308. We're going to get that "You Are Not Safe" manifesto from Ryan Ray, and
Hmm.
we're going to see we're going to sort of go around and get reactions from a bunch of the mutiny guys to reading his manifesto, his open letter. There's not really any dialogue during that point. It's more just reaction shots. But do you remember much about that feeling on set that you would have had with that, or were you even looking at anything?
Um, what do you mean looking at anything?
Because
Like,
you're looking at on screen
right.
his open letter.
Yeah.
Was it just the direction, like everybody look at a screen blankly, or were you trying to tap into something on that day?
Yeah. So that whole thing, that whole moment was, yeah, it was before we shot, it was like really reading that monologue, really trying to understand every piece of it and what he was saying. And I don't remember what he was saying there, but um, I do remember at the time having it just vividly in my mind, knowing that, creating this reality of this guy has just ended his life, and here are the things, here's his manifesto, here's his feelings about this world that we live in. And yeah, I mean, no, we weren't looking at anything on screen. We very rarely ever were. Um, but yeah, I remember, it was kind of like every person, every character, take liberty here and react the way that you want to react here. Some people, I think, Jonathan Cho, who played Wonder Boy, was tearing up, and I think I just kind of played it as like really taking this thing in. I was smoking because Carl was like a very heavy smoker in the show, and um, just kind of, just trying to react and really feel what he was saying. And it wasn't hard. I mean, the writing in that show was really, really solid. And the things that he was saying, I don't remember what, but they were justified. They were real. Um, so yeah, I remember that was a really, yeah, it was an impactful moment. It was good.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, are there any other favorite moments from set that you wanted to share with us? Could be related to a scene or just sort of between scenes.
I you know, maybe the first episode was like another party scene where we were like celebrating something, and Toby Huss was doing his Frank Sinatra impersonation, which is something that he does in real life and has toured with and done live shows as. And so that was a lot of fun. But I think my favorite moments as a whole from that show were the things that we would do off camera, and the jokes that we would make. And, again, like anytime Mark O'Brien was on set, he and I had a great time just making weird, weird, absurd jokes that nobody else could really get on board with. Um, and then Toby, just listening to Toby Huss, who is a true raconteur, kind of prop his leg up on some chair and just tell us a story about his life, and whether it be show business or anything else throughout his like very uh, very exciting, interesting life. So yeah, just getting to know everybody on and off set was really, really special. I mean, that show was, once we all left that show, we felt like we were really spoiled, because every other job that I had gotten after that just never felt as special.
Well, speaking of that, is there anything that you've done since Halt and Catch Fire or recently that you can talk about that you wanted to tell us about?
Yeah, I did a good handful of TV shows. I had a period of about 6 years where I didn't work at all, because I had no chops in acting. I had no connections, like Mark O'Brien had gotten me with his agent, which was really, really a sweet and kind thing to do. But I started auditioning and I just couldn't nail anything. And I think I was also in this period where 25, there were just certain age ranges that I wasn't really working for. So for about 6 years, I just wasn't working. And then eventually when I was living in LA and I started getting commercials and then started booking some TV stuff. I did like an episode of the Goldbergs. I did like an episode of, you know, uh, CSI. And then I got like a couple episodes on this show called The Offer on Paramount Plus. And Daisy Jones and the Six was like a bigger job that I had. But most recently, I booked a role on this film called The Complete Unknown that is the new Bob Dylan biopic with Timothy Chalamet and Edward Norton and Monica Barbaro and all these really great people. And I worked about 4 weeks on that show, and I just wrapped on Saturday morning. We did a week of night shoots, but that was that's the most notable thing that I've done since, and it's weird just kind of coming off of it. It was one of the Halt and Catch Fire, and then this is really the next kind of most exciting and special experience that I had.
Yeah,
It's
what a
it's there's
cast.
a it's going to be a great it's a really cool movie. James Mangold, who did Walk the Line and Ford versus Ferrari and all these great films, but yeah, but there's something really special about getting to work on a show or a film for multiple weeks or multiple months, as opposed to being a day player or working like a week on a show. When you get to kind of become part of that family and really build relationships and have your own inside jokes and all that stuff is really, really something else. It's something special. And it's I think it's really what makes this job uh one of the best jobs that you can have.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we're gonna have to all check that movie out when it's available. I know it'll
Yeah,
probably be
it'll
editing for a
be
little while, but we'll look for
yeah,
it. But
it'll be
thank you
big. It'll
so
definitely be around.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much
Yeah.
for doing this interview. It's been such a blast to talk with you and deep dive into your seasons and your episodes and your character. And just thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this was really cool. And when I saw you were doing this, I thought it was a great idea. And I thought, everybody who worked on that show has a lot of love and compassion for it. And I think it's a big reason why, you've been able to just get a lot of the people on, because we love talking about it.
Yeah, that's becoming so clear. And I think it's, as a fan, it feels better to know that a show that you like was something people actually want to talk about and they enjoyed their experience. It makes it feel a little bit better.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you so much. And to everybody who's watching this, go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.